It's okay.
Okay, so let's start again. Okay, so, hi, hello, Eyal Weizman. I begin by congratulating you and the forensic architecture to this Right Livelihood Prize, and which is obviously very timely. But I mean, you've been working with the forensic architecture, this office or research institution, whatever I should call it, since 2011, 10, 11?
Something like that.
Yeah, so it's almost 15 years now. You have a long career behind you and with a lot of projects about investigating all kinds of political and other issues. But I think, I mean, right now, obviously, the most pressing thing is what's happening in Gaza. And that's, I assume, which occupies you a lot. So I was looking at the website, and you have this huge project called Cartography of Genocide, which is a very complex side of data sets. And you also have a long written text, which I saw is 827 pages, so it's a very complex documentation.
How far into it are you, Sven?
I started reading it, but it's a lot.
It's illustrated.
Yeah,
so,
it is, and I think
it's under 300,000 words. So for you, it's just.
I can read it, but we will post a link to it underneath the interviews. People can see it. But I'd say, can you just talk about your work and how what kind of work are you doing on this topic?
So
describe what you do.
Yeah, sure. So. You'd recall the South Africa team. South Africa brought a legal challenge against Israel at the ICJ, that's the International Court of Justice in The Hague. The International Court of Justice is authorized legally to issue something that is called provisionary measures, but only on the gravest of crimes. So if you have issues of war crimes and crimes against humanity, they cannot be going to the end of the queue, basically, and could wait for years. But genocide requires an immediate action. There's something about genocide that still rings a bell in the context of international law, in the conscience of the world, etc. And they had a very plausible case that the genocide is unfolding in Gaza. And very early on, we were involved, we were approached and involved with them and providing the information. And you'd imagine they would approach us because just as you said, over the past 15 years or 14 years or so, forensic architecture has been working all over the world, but the origins of the practice and perhaps some of the best-known cases are in Palestine. I have, written previously about the Israeli occupation, the Israeli settler colonial project in Palestine. So it would have been a natural fit for them to approach us to provide evidence for them. And indeed, this 827 pages long report is our ledger, is our case. It is composed of a kind of an archive, an incredible, horrible archive of tens of thousands of bits of evidence, of incidents. Each one of them another form of destruction and killing. And but of course, genocide is not simply an addition of one case plus the other, plus the other, plus the other, and then you cross some threshold and you have a genocide. Genocide requires order and organization on different levels. Firstly, genocide requires intent. So it's really the emphasis in genocide cases is, of course, on what you've done, but what you wanted to do when you have done something. And the intent, famously, is the intent to destroy, in whole or in part, a protected group. Who knows what one wants? Do you know what you want, Sven?
Not necessarily, no.
Can you say what the state wants? This is a complex analysis. Of course, it helps you if the Israeli president is saying that there are no innocents in Gaza, and if the Israeli Ministry of Defense telling you that these are human animals, and if the prime minister is saying that we need to treat them like the Amalekites, which are this semi-nomadic people that were bothering the Israelites throughout the Bible, and were the kind of a mitzvah, the deed was to exterminate their memory and their root, children included. But you need to establish not so much what is happening, each one of those tens of thousands of data points divided into destruction of hospitals, destruction of public institutions, attacks on aid, attacks on agriculture, and so on and so forth, but how they link together and how they can reflect, how what happens on the ground can reflect a mental intent, an intent that exists between brains of people, within ideology. So the formation of intent is a historical, cultural interrogation, and you have facts on the ground. And between them, this is your thesis. How something, intent, as we say, it's full of contradictions. And we can talk about the contradictions in the Israeli genocidal intent. And how you connect that intent through the declaration. Of course, you have the declaration, this is helpful, but it's not all, to things that are happening on the ground. So that is really where you need to look at, or you need at your side something that is called pattern analysis. Pattern analysis is a technical term that every data analyst knows. Data does not appear in random, but add up towards tendencies. It has peaks, it has throughs, it has moments of escalation, it has rhythms in which it is happening. And one needs to look at patterns. For example, if you have unit number 1, say paratroopers, Israeli paratroopers in the north of Gaza, entering and destroying all mosques, right? If it's only one unit and it is doing that, that could be, you file under war crimes of that unit at a particular location, because of course you're not allowed to destroy cultural places unless, there are exchange of fire from it. So you're seeing that if you would have, kind of like what's called contingency, you would see that particular public institutions across that would be attacked. But you see, that's a systematic attack. Each one that is arrived at is being bombed. And then you see another unit, say Golani, in the middle of the Gaza Strip, entering and doing the same. And then you see in the south of the Gaza Strip another unit, say Givati, entering and doing the same. And then you'd see them doing the same at different times. That is something that's called systematic and widespread as a legal category. And this is something that allows lawyers, without entering the guilty mind of the perpetrator, to plausibly assume that there is a plan, or there is an order, or there is implicit or explicit. Genocide allows also orders to be implicit, because very people know that you committed genocide, you don't want to write it down. So, but it allows, the pattern allows to connect facts on the ground with mental state. And this is really, that relation between abstract and material is what that report is doing. And of course, I need to return the mic to you because I'm speaking too much. But of course, you need to look and understand that patterns also exist historically, well before the beginning of the genocide. It is something about the genocide. The minute you declare it, you know a genocide is happening. It can push back its own starting point. Because separation, for example, when you separate, apartheid, for example, can be part of a genocide or not. But when you have apartheid that leads to genocide, the apartheid becomes, retroactively part of that. So that is the kind of the things that we're looking at.
No, it's very complex. I mean, it takes a long time. I started to look through it a couple of days ago, this whole cartography in the text, so it's a lot of information to treat, and I guess it's an evolving thing, because some things change. But I wanted also to address that from a slightly different angle, saying you're forensic architecture. I mean, in what sense? Obviously, architecture can be treated very concretely, and it has, like in your book, the HoloLens, which deals with spatial fixtures, how it's organized. But would you say that there's some specific competence of the architect that allows the architect to understand these things?
I guess architecture. I guess maybe the best way to discuss it is because this is when we first met. I don't know, 20 years ago. So I was presenting my first work on the architecture of the Israeli occupation and the architecture of warfare, and how soldiers were redesigning the city as they were attacking it, and etc. And that way was using architecture in one way. Architecture was primarily the architectural fact, a building that is being built, a militarized building, let's say, in a settlement, as a part of a human wall around Palestinians, or a wedge, or as a kind of outpost of control, etc. Or a destroyed building, usually a destroyed Palestinian building, that you need to read into what destroyed it. So in a sense, it kind of, at the beginning of forensic architecture, was looking at architecture like an archaeologist of something that just happened, but still archaeology. You try to read back from material disposition of something to the formative forces that shaped it. But then we fell upon something that was a transformation, a media transformation, a political transformation. It was radical, that reformatted journalism and photojournalism and media, etc. And that was the kind of combination between available satellite images, available camera phones in the hands of witnesses in the front line of conflict, documenting themselves, risking their life to document something, and the social media website that became like the sea in which this flotsam was circulating. And immediately something happened. The kind of a lot has been written and understood from the point of view of the the kind of the citizen journalist, that can document that. But from the point of view of the investigative journalist, things completely transformed. The whole idea of anti-war investigative journalism was a source-based practice. You needed to be a great investigative journalist. You need to cultivate sources in the halls of power. You need people in the government, you need people in the Ministry of Defense, in industries. You need to take care of them so they take care of you. There was a whole social art to that, and then you get the leak, the great leak, and connect it to others and expose any of the great stories like Seymour Hersh, But that requires contacts. And to maintain contacts, you need also to give something to those people. You need to be a conduit. You're always a double agent as an investigative journalist. And the open source revolution was a bunch of anarchists and internet kind of amateurs, like Elliot Higgins or Bellingcat and us. We emerged at the same time. And we said, we don't want to be in touch with anyone. We don't need to be in touch. There is no hermetic wall between the domain of the secret and the domain of the public that needs a small hole drilled in it so that something can leak. In fact, everything is out there. That was our motto. That was our principle. Everything is out there. You just need to learn how to look again. We don't know how to look. We don't know how to look at images because we were looking at images for clues in the image itself, for stories in it. We were looking like in blow up, no? You would find the detail in the image. In fact, that was the wrong way. We needed to look at in one image at a link to another image, and in both of them a link to a third, a fourth, a fifth. We need to locate those swarm of images on a satellite image, on a satellite photograph, which is itself just another photograph. We need to link them with audio files of people on the ground, understanding the difference in which vision and sound travel differently to the camera. And you needed to, out of that cloud, some shape would emerge. So you'd have secret policies, I don't know, extraordinary rendition. And in the old way, you know, you needed some CIA with a guilty conscience that you a little bit feed, and they feed you, and you'll have it out. And no, that was done in a very different way, between, you know, kind of like train spotters who were like doing flight path, and people looking on social media and interviewing people, asking them which labels of water, of mineral water, do you remember from your journey? And they remember, Czech Republic. Oh, that water, that's Djibouti, etc. And starting to reconstruct fragments, building fragments and fragments into a whole. No one of those videos or images or fragments of recollection tells the whole story. That was the principle. And in order to put them all together, you needed architecture. And it's not like architecture is an optional thing to do it. It's the only thing to do it. Frankly, if you have something happening in a street corner and you have 25 videos filming that incident at different time from different angles, the only way to make sense of it is to build an architectural model and to place each one of those videos in it. And then you create a studio, like a media studio, and then you can move from camera 1 to camera 14 to camera 64 to, you know, and start kind of like interrogate a case through its multiple manifestations in videos, in memory, and in matter, in those traces. It's not that the archaeology part of forensic architecture ever went, it was just augmented by others.
But I mean, it's, just very concrete at forensic architecture. I mean, it sounds like you would be like, you know, 10,000 people required to do this kind of work. I mean, how do you, maybe it's difficult to answer, but how do you actually proceed? How do you actually work with this? I mean, in your office, what do you actually
Practically
do?
as an office? Okay, so the way we are organized now is in something called the Investigative Commons. So we have forensic architecture, 25, 30 of us, still at Goldsmiths, although the university, as you know, is like melting down. We're still kind of like some core there.
And you're a professor of post-colonial architecture, that was your title?
No. It's called, I'm professor for visual and cultural studies.
Because the first title was post-colonial architecture, I remember that, when you got the job, right?
Some other,
other
dude.
Okay, some other dude, okay.
But not a bad...
No.
I would say decolonial
Yeah.
architecture. I mean, I know why you think that. Because of Sandy and Alessandra, we had the office together, decolonizing architecture, art residency, and now they're in Stockholm, in Sweden, doing amazing work.
We actually interviewed them some time ago. But okay.
Yeah. So decolonizing architecture, that was that. Post-colonial, I'm a bit ambivalent about this term.
Yeah,
if you want, we can talk about it.
I thought that was a strange title for university share, post-colonial architecture. But still, it doesn't matter. That was just my recollection. So, I mean, how do you actually work? You started describing that.
Okay, so we have a university core. That's like the biggest group of us. We work together on cases, but as we work, we develop technologies and techniques and ways of doing and ways of disseminating. And our dissemination, I think, I want to think it is as wild and creative as our techniques of investigating, because it's moving from, you know, the International Court of Justice in The Hague to, you know, to exhibitions in places, to, you know, really kind of close work with social movements in different places. This guy's from Montevideo, who's filming, so, you know, we could talk about that. as Juan-Pedro.
Yeah, but I guess it's a very complex operation.
But then,
yeah.
so now around it, there
Yeah.
is a kind of, there is about a dozen officers now. From here, I'm flying to Rio de Janeiro, and I'm going to help inaugurate another forensic architecture skill within another NGO. So it's going to be a unit. We're going to hire people that know to do forensic architecture. They're going to work in an anti-police NGO, and the same we've done in Bogota and in Mexico City. The same we do in many other places in Athens, and of course Berlin, and of course the first one was in Ramallah, where we started together with an organization called Al-Haq, which was designated a terrorist organization by the Israeli government. The terrorist of truth.
Okay.
But anyway, so this is how it is, and it's funded through grants that are drying up, and particularly, and even if most of our work is not about Palestine, Palestine is obviously a red flag for a lot of foundations.
Yeah, sure.
And they, so the Berlin office had to shrink radically, because although we're working on neo-Nazis in German police, and although we're working on in the German office on German colonial genocide in Namibia, and this is something we see it as a service to German society, they defund us because of what we do and what I believe and profess of Palestine liberation. The liberation of Palestine is the liberation of everybody in it, including Jews.
So I was thinking, going back a little bit to your earlier texts that became part of this book, The Hollow Lands, that you published with us like 15 years ago, and in some sense, when you're saying that if there's something happening on a street corner and there are like 15 various videos being done from various angles, and you have to construct an architecture model to it. I mean, this may sound a bit provocative, but in some sense you're mimicking a kind of military logic, right? Because I assume the army would actually work in the same way. I mean, there's some kind of do you see what I'm saying? That there's a kind of retracing or reconstruction of a military way of thinking.
I think less so in a multi-perspectivity of things, because I think it's not that the army didn't catch up, and the police forces and Secret Service did not catch up. But right now, all Secret Service agency have in their open source intelligence. They have people that do architecture model and do that. But we had several years on them. Yeah, you could say that the history of satellite imagery is the history of the Cold War. Granted. You could say that the camera, the history of the camera, to a certain extent, intersects. It's obviously not a history of the army, but intersects. And you could say that the history of photography and colonialism intersects in many ways. But I wanted to try to convince you that what we're doing is not reappropriating state technology, but to do something else. So you would say, we call what we do counter-forensics, not forensics. Okay? Counter-forensics is forensics against the state. It's like a people or civil society or social movement. It's a tool for that, to investigate the state, whereas forensics is the state investigating people. And then you say, okay, but it's just like, I don't know, the rebels take over a machine gun and just turn it around and shoot. It's the same machine gun.
Yeah.
And then I'll try to say, no, there's a different epistemology. There's different ways in which we're working. There is a collaborative way in which we're working that is very different. And this is right across the three different enclosures that traditional forensic practice operates in. So traditional state forensics. Rule number one, put a cordon around the site. Cordon around the site, turn that area, cut it from the daily life, and turn it into state space. So if you like, some kind of state of exception, if you want to be, but it's not necessary to say that.
Not necessarily, no.
but yes, it's not a space that anyone can enter who is not a state agent. You need to flash your FBI card to slip over the cordon, as you see often in a movie. Second, the lab is a hermetic place that operates by its own rules, by its own, and certain kind of experts are allowed and those not. And then the court is the third enclosure that is the most ritualized space. Counterforensics tries to break those three zones. First of all, it says it's not what is in the crime scene is always bigger than the site of altercation. It happens in boardrooms and in suppliers and in regulation offices. You need to actually break the cordon outside, and something need to leak out of the cordon. You always work with partial information, because the state that perhaps did the killing and put the cordon would control that zone. So you need to do it differently. Something needs to leak. Sometimes what is leaking is a photograph from the cordon off area somebody has taken and it's gone. Sometimes it's just the memory of somebody who would recall it and would tell you. Sometimes it has to leak in another way. Two, the lab is not a hermetic and a kind of hygienic space. It is being dirtied by all sorts of agents and collaborators in a huge... Firstly, we only work together with the victims. And this is something forensics would never do. We are not calling ourselves neutral. We are always on their side. And we're saying it's not our neutrality that should allow us into speech, but the quality of the evidence that should do that. And it's a collaboration between artists and architects and scientists and lawyers and journalists and whatever, so it's like this kind of messy space. And then rather than the court, it is sometimes the court, but sometimes also many other fora in which it operates. So it's not exact. So we might, we share technology. I also have a belt on my trousers, and I don't know where did this come from. But it's just the way you are actually using it and composing it into a social, political space is different.
Yeah, well, we talked about this idea of the forensic and the state forensics versus the counter forensics, but I wanted to maybe approach this from the opposite angle, or whatever that means. I mean, one thinks of architecture as obviously, as you say, architecture is a perfect tool to investigate all these complex assemblages of things and events and people and flows of data and information. But there's also, at least historically, a kind of productive sense of architecture. I mean, is there a sense the architecture, a kind of productive, projective sense of architecture? Architecture is a project or something. I mean, maybe this is a foreign thing to you for your work, but I mean, is there some way in which your work contains a positive thing, like a blueprint for something to be done for the future? I'm not going to ask for utopia, but you see what I'm saying? Is there something like a possible future emerging from what you're doing?
I don't know. I mean, we tend to see the worst things humanity is producing. Yeah. We see people at the worst days of their lives. We see the worst kind of human behavior, the worst, deepest kind of sorrow and pain, rather than not easily, but imagining. But sometimes it's. Sometimes an architect thinks that they're projecting something into the future, and actually what they do is some kind of rhyming with the past, or reproduce some kind of past idea. And sometimes you investigate the past, but you're able to transform. It's not like you have to aim at the future to transform the future. And in fact, it is maybe also fair to say that historically, in the history of revolution, of transformation, political transformation, etc., it's moments of great loss and rupture that allow society to be transformed. And the interesting thing is that when you practice law, and of course law can be practiced as a revolutionary way, if you are you're practicing it and questioning its foundations at the same time. You need to use it, but by using it, you're changing, aspiring to some kind of way of changing it. And it's most clear in situation of settler colonial violence, colonialism, etc., when we investigate in Namibia the German colonial genocide, the dispossession, but also the transformation of the environment as a consequence or as an evidence, initially as evidence for the genocide. Sometimes you can find cemeteries, mass graves. Sometimes you can find traces of concentration camps. We do, Few of them were known exactly where they are before we came and synced up all this historical photograph from the 19th century. And you can say here was the homestead, here was the cemetery, here's the concentration camp, please protect those sites. We've done it for locating the exact mechanism, the exact architecture of Shark Island, and therefore also its modus operandi. In Waterberg, in Okahanja, in Windhoek, we located the position of concentration camps. But one of the strongest signals of a rupture is environmental transformation. So the genocide has been in Namibia. We're talking about 1904 to 1908. Imperial Germany decides to wipe up two nations in the area that they called Southwest Africa, the Nama and Over Herero people. But then they take the land and then they start a Faustian project. They cut canals and dams and fencing, and they could terraform this area, and that led to the transformation, to invasion of species, to bush encroachment, to desertification in some part, and that signal is stronger and enduring and most enduring. And in fact, it's the one material. When you walk through the bush in Namibia, you cut your leg on a thorny bush. This is a direct material link, if you like, to the genocide. But to analyze that, you need to also understand architecture in a completely different way. So you need to understand, if you say the evidence of the genocide of the Nama and Over Herero people, this is what we learned from our partners, because we work, as I said, we work together with them on that. And whenever you investigate something, you look, what is the benchmark?
Yeah.
How was it? Let's say at the eve of the genocide, how was the environment? What species were growing here? What flora and fauna was here? How the agrarian economy was organized? And you understand a different conception of architecture in which it's kind of living in an area with minute transformation, with some care for some species, for some waterways, for some water holes, etc. So it's architecture in the sense that it is an interaction between people and the environment, but it's not architecture in a way that you would think about it, like a round building for egalitarian community or something like that. No, it has a different kind of, it's not framed, it doesn't have a clear border where it begins, where it ends, but it is a living with, a caring for an environment that is allow you to think about architectural practice differently. Again, it's not an expert that makes something. Another way of thinking about this is a collaboration that forensic architecture did with David Wengrow, who's one side of this. David Graeber and David Wengrow, who've written this wonderful book on architecture, I suppose, called The Dawn of Everything, in which they discover kind of a many different type of, let's say, non-hierarchical or less hierarchical, or sometimes hierarchical, sometimes not, societies, based on new archaeological finds of the last several decades. And kind of David Wengrow and us were kind of thrown together to do a piece for the Venice Biennale. I found it an incredible intellectual challenge. And I said to David, everywhere in the book, you and David Graeber are writing, in the last 3 decades, all this new evidence has emerged about it that append our understanding of teleology, of cities and architecture as a means of control. So, as a person that deals with evidence, I would ask, why in the last 3 decades this evidence has emerged? What happened? What technology? What methodology? What actually happened in archaeology itself to allow all this evidence to emerge? Because you don't speak about that evidence, you speak about it as if it's been discovered. And he said, anyway, we started thinking about it together. And we realized that a lot of it is a kind of a transformation of figure and ground. It's not that you dig in for the object in the earth, it's the earth that is the signal. And there are multiple ways to look at the magnetism of the earth, of pollen in the earth, at ground penetrating radar, look at densities of mud as kind of signal of some kind of anthropogenic behavior. And then you start understanding that the archaeological signal is something that is different, that is kind of, it's much more something that flows. It's not an object that exists within a flow. It's the flow itself. And we've done this work on an amazing archaeological site in Ukraine. We went to visit it, although it was the war. Finally, we didn't manage to get there. We were stuck in Kyiv for war-related reasons. But the site called Nebelivka, and the piece was called the Nebelivka Hypothesis, is really about the deep past of architecture and potentially the deep future, if you like. It actually was showing a form of living, and of course, the tropes of egalitarianism, kind of circular form, uniform elements, but also elements of self-organization within this big circle around an empty center. But we've understood and also worked with other archaeologists that allowed us to understand that the famous soil of Ukraine, the black earth, the Chernozem, this treasure that all colonizers from the Greeks to the Stalinists to the Nazis were after in Ukraine, the thing that turned it into bloodlands in Timothy Snyder's term, is a consequence of a certain living on that soil. It's an archaeological artifact, potentially. The jury is still out, but there are people that actually would like to speculate upon that, the production of earth as an archaeological, as a consequence of an archaeological encounter, i.e. the Chernozem is an archaeological artifact, if you like, and therefore also architectural. So I think that these kind of questioning of the source code of the architectural dictionary, if you like, is I think fundamental to get out of the bottleneck and the dead end that architecture in its current form has arrived at.